everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a debate and discussion about what is currently the best trilogy of films within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So as to expect, there could be plenty of spoilers for all movies and television series throughout the MCU, so just beware when going into this overall video. So as we currently stand within 2023, there are currently 5 trilogies after the likes of Thor and the Avengers movies having recent 4 installments. And if we were to start off with what I believe is the worst trilogy of the MCU, and for me, that would be the Iron Man movies. Now, whilst Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark still remains the most impactful character, this trilogy is the one that gets progressively worse with each installment. Of course, the first film from 2008, which started it all, still remains a very fun action-adventure driven by Tony's arc. The second film indulges too much in the comedy aspects, Mickey Rourke's Whiplash not being that much of a villain, and whilst it did introduce us to Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow, the S.H.I.E.L.D. segment of the movie perhaps made it longer than necessary. But the real disappointment was Iron Man 3, which wasted the potentially great story arcs of Tony, dealing with some sort of PTSD following the Chitauri invasion that we saw in the Avengers movie, and the emergence of the extremist virus. So there was plenty of scope for some strong story. Unfortunately, the movie ended up being a bloated mess, taking away the importance of the Iron Man suits by having Tony command a whole legion of suits, and of course the biggest crime was making a complete joke of the Mandarin, who is Iron Man's most famous antagonist. So the next trilogy, being the least worst, is the Ant-Man trilogy. Now the first film still holds up as a solid, brisk heist adventure, still very much watchable. The sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp, isn't bad with introducing Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne, but it was a bit underwhelming with Ghost not proving to be anything of a substantial villain, and the sequel itself seemed to just play alongside the typical formula, with not really having any great outstanding moments or sequences throughout it. But we then talk about Quantumania, which gained more infamy for its failure at the box office, but it's really not as bad as what people perceived it to be. It was watchable enough, and perhaps it was only bogged down by perhaps being too large scale, as we see both the Pyms and the Van Dynes transported into the quantum realm. It was somehow diminished by having 4 other members within the Ant-Man squad proving to be every bit as capable as Scott in the costume. I think Jonathan Majors Kang was good in the role, but he also perhaps is diminished himself by the fact that Scott defeated him in the final climax, which undercuts his threat level to an extent going forward for any future appearances within Marvel's Phase 5. We then start to look at what are certainly the good trilogies within the MCU, and whilst many may not agree with having this at this position here, the third best trilogy is the Guardians of the Galaxy. At some base level, all 3 movies are at least decent, fun, entertaining movies, very much carried by the chemistry between the Guardians themselves, generating most elements of comedy with some emotional and heartfelt moments thrown in there as well. The first film from 2014 still remains the best of the trilogy. Volume 2 definitely had an impactful final climax with Yondu's death, but was somewhat overindulgent and bloated. It probably went too far in terms of the humour, and was perhaps a bit disjointed with having the Guardians all over the place with their own side plots and quests. Despite again some good emotional beats between Star-Lord and Ego, he didn't really turn out to be much of a substantial villain either. We then look at Volume 3, which was definitely an improvement, generating much more darker and intense moments with the backstory of Rocket Raccoon, lending it a certain weight and substance. The High Evolutionary, whilst flawed in the final third, definitely proved to be the best villain of the trilogy, and overall I do believe that Volume 3 was a satisfactory conclusion for the characters involved and the trilogy itself. So we then go on to the runner-up on this list, and that would be the Spider-Man trilogy. With Marvel helping Sony rejuvenate their most iconic character within movies, all 3 films are at least consistently good, standing each on their own individually. Tom Holland's performance is a good iteration of Peter Parker, having plenty of likability and energy, but we do look at the Spider-Man aspect, which still has some question marks. In terms of the more AI-driven suits that he wears, the fact that Peter is much more reliant on assistance from the Avengers rather than being mostly independent, and the various changes and race swaps to the supporting cast. But we still look at this trilogy, which still has enough heart, spirit and an optimistic tone that is true enough to the character. Now, out of all 3 installments, No Way Home was probably the most impactful, with all of its variant characters and play on nostalgia, with bringing back both Tobey Maguire and Andy Garfield. but this was much more than a typical fan service initiative, as both versions were made integral to the character and story. And for me, I believe the Spider-Man trilogy is still very solid and strong and a good representation of the character, and due to the gargantuan success of No Way Home, it won't be too much longer before this trilogy has a fourth part added to it. So we then come to number 1 on this list in what I believe is undisputed as the best MCU trilogy, and that is the Captain America trilogy. It really is the only trilogy out of them all that improves with each installment. All 3 movies also ranking high amongst the best within the entire MCU. And when we look at the first film, The First Avenger, it is actually one of the most underrated of Marvel movies. It really is that good old-fashioned style comic book adventure, very strong, especially in its opening first hour, and I believe this is a film that did it right, by concentrating fully on Steve Rogers' origin within the 1940s, and it had that real good mix of humour and action and drama, really pulling on that emotion and heroism and romanticism. It really is a solid watch that deserves far more recognition many years after its release. Things then go up a notch with the superlative Winter Soldier, still widely regarded as the true elite of the MCU, completely standalone from the original by pushing Steve Rogers into a present-day, modern-day society, going at odds with the SHIELD protocols and agenda and the government hierarchy, and at the same time going up against his friend Bucky Barnes, who has now been transformed into the unrelenting Winter Soldier. A fusion of political and conspiracy thriller, backed up with balls-to-the-wall action. This is how a great movie sequel should be. Bringing in a higher, bolder direction than the first film, you don't need to rely on it to still enjoy this film. It remains an absolute top-class, stellar and spectacular entertainment, delivered with a real skill and panache, an absolute outstanding fight choreography, and everything was elevated even more so with the third film, Captain America Civil War, where we see Steve being protective of Bucky after his misdemeanors, which leads to a big fraction within the Avengers in terms of what they should be fighting for. Yes, there is the more than valid argument that this installment is very much a reconfigured Avengers film. It was also majorly significant for introducing us both to Spider-Man and Black Panther into the MCU, both who would then go on to enjoy massive solo successes after this movie. And this film was on an even bigger scale than the second film, and the spectacle was typified none more so with that epic airport battle sequence, where we see all of the Avengers going toe-to-toe against one another. It still remains one of the quintessential moments in all of the MCU, taking all of that comic book escapism and imagination from all of the comic books and the animated series and translating it on the big screen so magnificently. But this film actually looked to venture away from the typical formula of the MCU by having a much more lower scale climax with personal stakes, as we see the final confrontation between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, with no straightforward heroic ending, but at the same time not deconstructing the heroes either. It would also give us perhaps the villain with most depth and impact in Baron Zemo since Loki from the first Avengers movie. Filled with the same serious intelligence and intensity as the second film, Civil War has enough involvement of Steve Rogers to say that he's still the leading character, just about, and it manages to juggle so many of the other characters and their story arcs amidst all of the action, which is a true achievement, and the MCU really wouldn't reach these epic heights again until Infinity War. But as with Winter Soldier, Civil War is again amongst the top bracket of Marvel at its best, and without question it ends the Captain America story on a high. Now some will say, well, what about the upcoming Captain America New World Order, slated for release next year in 2024? Will that not be a fourth installment ending this overall trilogy? Now I will dismiss that notion, since New World Order is the story of Sam Wilson as Captain America and not Steve Rogers. So that will be very much a different era of the Captain America story, despite using the same brand name, very much like how the next generation of Star Trek movies differentiate from the original films based on the original series. And there still remains that valid case that Sam Wilson would be far more potent in his original identity as Falcon rather than picking up the Captain America mantle. And with lead actor Chris Evans not likely returning after Endgame, this is why Captain America still remains a trilogy, and without question, the best one set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So these are my overall thoughts and feelings and breakdown of what I believe to be the worst and best trilogies currently within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let me know what you think in the comments below, whether you disagree with any of my choices, whether you feel there are any moments or films that I've missed out on. Do you think there are other potential trilogies upcoming as we enter Marvel's Phase 5 and Phase 6 that could stand up to the current trilogies right now? Or do you agree with me that you think these trilogies stand alone as they are, and especially that Captain America still remains the best within the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other suggestions regarding any other movies, television series, or any other topics within the entertainment and pop culture that you'd like to see me cover, then also let me know within the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on those topics within the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.